The snow came early that year, brushing the edges of September with its silent silver breath. It blanketed the upper ridges of the Sangre de Cristo Range, where pine trees huddled like witnesses and the wind moved, as if carrying secrets too old to be spoken aloud. Down below, the valley lay quiet but for the distant hammer of an axe and the slow creak of leather as a man walked beneath the burden of his own past. His name was Eli Mercer. Folks in the surrounding towns might remember the name if they listened close in saloons or at the corners of old post offices where gossip settled like dust. They'd say he once worn a deputy's star in New Mexico territory and lost it the day his brother hung for a crime they both knew he hadn't done. After that, Eli disappeared from the world as men sometimes do, swallowed by grief and the wilderness alike. He rode alone now, with a gelding too smart for his own good and a pack mule he'd nursed back to health from the brink of dying. Every stitch of his gear bore the wear of seasons and solitude, but his eyes, that deep river gray, had the clearness of someone who no longer ran from anything but himself. The woman came into his life not like thunder, but like dusk, gradual, quiet, impossible to ignore once she was there. Her name was Mee Calder. She stood behind the bar of the Timberline Rest, a rough-cut lodge near the edge of Carson National Forest, built more to house loggers and lost men than any passing tourists. She had the kind of bearing that kept trouble at arm's length, and the kind of silence that made people tell her things they wouldn't even admit to their own kin. She arrived 2 years before and never once spoke of where she came from, only that she was staying, for now. It was that last part, the for now, that Eli caught onto when he came in for shelter during a storm. He'd taken a seat by the fire and hadn't moved for near an hour, watching the flames like they held answers. She brought him coffee without being asked and left him be, which he appreciated more than words. That night the wind howled against the windows, and Eli stayed late, fixing a leak above the hearth without prompting. She thanked him with stew and a nod, and that was the start of something. Days turned to weeks and he made excuses to linger, fix a shutter, mend a fence post, dig a root cellar where the ground refused to cooperate. She didn't pay him but left things for him anyway, a warm biscuit on the porch rail, a blanket stitched with care and tucked into his saddlebag. He never touched her, barely spoke more than a handful of words each day, but in the quiet of that place something deeper passed between them, a knowing, a slow-growing trust, tender and raw-edged. Until the day she dared him to leave. It wasn't a shout or a fight. It was after the first thaw, when the rivers surged and the roads turned to sucking mud. They'd spent the morning hauling timber from a fallen pine, soaked to the bone and covered in grime. She wiped her brow and looked at him, really looked, and said, "You planning to stay stuck to this place like a burr, or do you just not know how to walk away anymore?" He met her eyes. That low storm light flickered between them. "Maybe I'm waitin' for a reason." Her mouth tightened. "Don't wait on me." He nodded once, slow and certain, and walked out. But he didn't go far. Not really. Half a mile from the Timberline Rest, tucked behind a thicket of cottonwoods, there was a clearing. Eli had noticed it early that winter when tracking elk. It had a spring-fed stream, good sun, and land firm enough to build on. The kind of place that didn't just hold a man, it welcomed him. He set the first post that evening, alone. He didn't tell her. Not yet. Because some things had to be built before they could be offered. And some names needed to be carved in wood before they could be said out loud. The spring wore on with a stubborn chill, the kind that clung to the hollows of dawn and reminded you that mountain winters never truly left, only pulled back for a spell. Eli rose with the frost still thick on the grass, his breath a cloud before him, hands calloused from axe and saw. The clearing he'd chosen began to shape itself into something more than a campsite, more than a man's passing whim. He started with the bones of the place. 4 walls squared to the sun, timber hewn by hand and stacked with a patience learned the hard way. He worked in silence, save for the rhythm of the mallet and the occasional murmured thought to the mule, who seemed content enough grazing in the meadow and watching him build like some slow-moving god. He hadn't seen me in weeks. She didn't come asking, and he didn't return to the lodge, not even to refill his stores. It was a kind of quiet protest, or maybe penance, not for what he'd done, because truth be told, he hadn't done much, but for what he hadn't yet figured out how to say. Each board he nailed, each stone he placed in the hearth, carried a weight deeper than its use. He wasn't building for shelter alone. He was building a promise, though he didn't yet know if it would ever be received. Mid-May brought wildflowers, stubborn as sin and bursting through the thawed earth like a hymn. That day, while setting the frame for the front door, he paused and took out his pocket knife. It was old, the blade nicked and dulled from years of service, but it was sharp enough still. He stared at the plank long and hard, then carved her name, not loud, not big, just there. Me. He shaped the letters like he was learning them for the first time. He didn't add anything else. Not yet. Back at the timberline rest, Me was learning to move without glancing toward the path he used to walk. Her hands kept busy, scrubbing pots, sweeping ash, restocking the pantry for a summer that might bring strangers or no one at all. But in the quiet moments, she'd find herself outside, looking at the trailhead, listening. She told him not to wait on her. But every day since he left, a part of her waited anyway. The lodge grew lonelier in his absence. The space where he used to lean against the wall, the tools he'd repaired without asking, even the patched spot in the roof where the leak used to be, it all marked the ghost of his presence. She tried to forget once, rode into town and stayed the night in Taos, drinking hard cider with a man who talked too much and laughed too loud. He kissed her in the alley, warm and eager, but her heart was somewhere else entirely, out in the woods, listening for the sound of hammer on wood. The next morning, she rode back before the sun cleared the peaks. By June, Eli had a roof over his head and smoke in the chimney. He cooked over the fire and bathed in the stream, skin burned ruddy from the sun, mind thick with thoughts he didn't have words for. He didn't go to her. He wasn't sure if she wanted him to. Then came the night she found him. It was near dusk, the sky bruised with violet and fire. He was splitting logs out back when he heard the horse first. Hers, he knew it by the rhythm of the hooves. She didn't speak as she dismounted, didn't greet him, just looked. He dropped the axe and wiped his brow. "What is this?" she asked finally, voice low. He didn't answer right away, just turned and led her around to the front of the cabin. She saw it then. The door. Her name carved clean and deliberate. She stared at it for a long while, arms crossed tight across her chest. "You think a name on a door makes this mine?" "No," he said. "I think it makes it offered." She looked past him into the dark interior. Rough-hewn walls, a single bed frame not yet strung, shelves empty but waiting. "You didn't even ask if I wanted it." "I didn't know how," he admitted. The silence between them stretched. Then she nodded once, sharp and small, like something inside her gave way, but just a little. "All right," she said. "Let's see if it's worth the trouble." And she stepped inside. Me didn't stay the night, not that first time. She walked slow through the place, fingers trailing the edge of the rough window frame, pausing by the hearth where the first ashes had settled. Her eyes caught on the half-built shelf, the way the boards leaned gently as if unsure of their purpose. Then she turned, gave Eli a look neither soft nor harsh, and left without a word. But the next morning, she came back. Not with bags or bedding, not with a promise, just a hammer in one hand and a coil of rope in the other. "If you're going to build shelves that crooked, I might as well do it myself," she muttered, and got to work. They didn't speak much those first days. They didn't call it anything, either. She still rode back to the lodge some nights, checked the books, made sure the old men by the fire weren't running their mouths too loud. But more and more often, she stayed after sunset, sitting with Eli on the porch in the deep hush that only comes when stars begin to open like frost flowers in the sky. They shared chores without division. She chopped wood with an unspoken fury, and he learned to cook something that wasn't just beans and salt. He made coffee just the way she liked it, black, hot, and without a word of praise expected. She patched his shirts without telling him, and he caught her more than once watching him work with a kind of private curiosity, like she was reading a book she hadn't decided whether to trust. Their wounds didn't vanish, they simply sat with them. One morning he found her by the stream, sleeves rolled and knees mudded. She was washing a cloth bundle with a gentleness that didn't match her usual brisk movements. When he drew close, she looked up and said, "It was my sister," her apron. She didn't elaborate. He didn't ask. He sat beside her in the grass and let the cold water run over his boots, the air thick with pine and memory. That night thunder rolled in. The kind that doesn't announce itself until it's overhead, cracking the sky in two. The rain came down hard, sharp as nails, and me stood in the doorway of the cabin watching it while Eli secured the shutters. "You got a leak," she said after a moment. "Yeah," he replied, "guess I do." She smiled, the corner of her mouth tilting like she was letting herself be amused for once. By August, the place felt lived in. Not polished, not perfect. There was dust in the corners and mice in the walls, but it breathed. It held warmth in the blankets stacked in the corner, in the way their boots sat side by the door, in the pan of cornbread cooling by the window. Eli never asked her to stay. She never said she would. But one morning he woke before the sun, rolled over, and found her asleep beside him on the floor, wrapped in an old quilt, her hand resting inches from his. He watched the light break over her face, and for the first time in years he felt something settle inside him. Not peace, not yet, but the shape of it. Later that day, she asked him why he built it. The cabin. The door. Her name. He paused, wiping sawdust from his hands, eyes on the mountains. Because I didn't know how else to say it. She didn't ask what he meant. She didn't have to. The first snow came quiet, drifting down in lazy swirls that melted on the roof and vanished on contact with the ground. Me stood outside with a bucket in her hand, watching it fall like it was something sacred, something she hadn't seen in a long while. Eli watched her from the window. Her shoulders were looser now, the set of her jaw no longer iron-hard. Still, he knew better than to mistake quiet for ease. Healing, he'd learned, wasn't a single thing. It came in layers, some as fine as breath, some as jagged as broken glass. They didn't call it home, but the cabin grew around them like one. She planted herbs by the window and stitched curtains from an old burlap sack. He trapped rabbits and carved handles for her kitchen knives. There were no grand declarations, no sharp turns of fate, just time and the daily act of choosing. Then the letter came. It was late October when the rider arrived, face red from the wind and coat heavy with trailed dust. He handed Eli a folded scrap sealed with wax, then tipped his hat and rode off before anyone could ask questions. Me watched Eli read it by lantern light. She didn't ask, not right away. But his mouth set in a line she hadn't seen in months, and when he folded the letter and tucked it into his coat, she knew something in him had shifted. That night he lay on his side, staring into the darkness. She touched his arm. Who was it from? He hesitated. My sister's boy, back east, says my father's dying. Me didn't say anything at first. Then, you going to go? I don't know. In the morning, she found him standing out by the horse, rubbing down the saddle with a kind of distant focus. He looked like a man trying to talk himself out of something. She stood across from him, arms folded against the cold. You left once, she said, without asking what I wanted. I didn't think I had the right. She stepped closer. You don't have to ask, but you do have to tell me. He met her gaze, wind tugging at his collar. If I go, it's not to stay. You sure? No, he swallowed, but I know where I want to come back to. Me nodded slowly. Then she reached into her coat, pulled something from her pocket, a small square of cloth, faded and soft at the edges. Take this, she said. Bring it back with you. He didn't ask why, he just took it. He left 2 days later, without ceremony. Just a firm hand on her shoulder and a look that said more than words ever could. She watched him ride out until the trees swallowed him, then went back inside and put another log on the fire. Winter closed in around her. The days grew short and still. The lodge stayed mostly empty, and she didn't ride into town. Instead, she kept the cabin warm. She cooked even when she wasn't hungry. She hung his coat on the hook by the door, just in case. Weeks passed. She didn't let herself count them. Until one morning, deep in December, a shadow crossed the window. A knock, one, then two, followed by silence. She opened the door. Eli stood there, gaunt and dust-covered, eyes rimmed with weariness. But in his hand, he held the cloth she'd given him, folded neat. Your father, she asked. He nodded, gaunt. I'm sorry. He stepped over the threshold, set the cloth on the table. Then he looked at her like a man who'd crossed a country to say one thing. I came back. She didn't move, not at first. Then she stepped to him, slow and sure, and laid her hand on his chest. "All right," she said, "let's begin again." The deep of winter settled like a hush across the high country, burying the trails, sealing the creeks in glass. At the cabin, the snow stacked thick on the roof, softening its sharp edges until it looked as if it had always been there, born of the land rather than built by hand. Eli and me moved through the days like a slow, shared prayer. They rose before light, fed the fire, chopped what would the wind hadn't buried. There were no grand speeches, no sudden vows. Just small kindnesses, repeated until they wore into the grain of their lives like the handle of a well-used tool. He built her a chair beside the hearth, sturdy and low, sanded smooth where her hands might rest. She baked bread in the coals, wrapping the loaves in old cloth to keep them warm. On clear days, they walked the ridge above the clearing, boots crunching through snow, the silence between them filled not with questions, but with presence. Sometimes, in the dim hours before dawn, Eli would wake to find her already up, staring into the fire, eyes distant. One morning, he sat beside her and asked, "Where do you go when you look like that?" She didn't answer right away. Then softly, "There was a child, years ago, mine." Eli didn't speak. "Didn't live long," she said. "I don't talk about it, not because I forget, because remembering hurts less if I keep it quiet." He reached for her hand. She let him. The days lengthened. Snow began to melt in earnest, dripping from the eaves, loosening the grip winter held on the earth. Underneath the cabin's eaves, crocuses pushed up brave and bright. One afternoon, she found him carving something behind the cabin. He didn't hide it, just turned it in his hands until she could see. A wooden sign. "Me's Place," it read. She blinked, "Thought you already named it." "That was the door," he said. "This is everything else." She ran her fingers over the letters. "You didn't ask." "No," he said, "but this time I figured I'd wait till you saw it, just in case you wanted to change it." She didn't change a thing. Spring came in full, carrying birdsong and mud and the green scent of possibility. The timberline rest changed hands that April. Me sold it to a couple from Arizona who wanted to try their hand at frontier charm. She left them her ledgers and a piece of advice: don't try to fix what the wind don't mind. They built a life, slowly, stubbornly, like the cabin itself. He would hold her hand on cold mornings without needing a reason. She would press her forehead to his when words failed him. They argued sometimes, about firewood, about whether to plant onions or potatoes, but never about the things that mattered. One evening in late summer, they sat on the porch as thunderheads gathered over the peaks. The wind stirred the trees and sent the scent of rain rolling low through the valley. She leaned against him, eyes on the horizon. "You remember when I told you not to wait on me?" "I remember. I didn't mean it." "I know." The first drops of rain hit the roof, soft as promises. Inside, the fire waited. And so did everything they had built, by hand, by heart, and by choice. The cabin stood solid and weathered with her name on the door and his soul in the beams. And together they stayed, not because they had to, but because they dared.